European EV sales are dropping. We're going to break that down, especially in the German market. Speaking of German market, BMW is canceling a $2 billion battery deal with Northvolt. We're talking about a little bit of the EV tariffs on Chinese vehicles and how it doesn't matter because they still are going to make so much money in Europe despite the modest tariffs that are inputted. We'll talk about Nissan leaving China, or at least trimming their production there. And then, even though EV registrations are down in Europe, they are rising, surprisingly, in my opinion, here in the United States. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Kirk. I talk about industry auto news, and I'm also reviewing a couple cars this week. The Lexus RX 450h Plus plug-in hybrid and the new 5 Series from BMW, a 530i that is pretty much fully kitted out, except it doesn't have the inline 6. But I'll talk about that powertrain when I review that vehicle. But let's start off over at Reuters. EU electric car sales drop in May as German demand slumps. And let's just get right into this juicy graph. In 2023, Germany sold somewhere around 43,000 units for the month of May. In the month of May of 2024, it dropped all the way down below 30,000 units, a drop of 30.6%. Meanwhile, places like France edged up 5%, Belgium up 45%, Netherlands down 12%, Sweden down 35%, even a bigger swing for Sweden than Germany. But neighboring country Denmark to Sweden is up 63%, Italy down 18%, Spain about neutral, Austria down 16%, Portugal down 7%, Finland down 32%, Poland, it's also negative, minus 5%, Ireland down about 40%, Luxembourg and Hungary, tiny volumes anyways. The German car market in the EU is so big that this swing really wipes out a lot of the gains you've seen in places like Belgium and Denmark, for example. And car sales overall are down 3% in the month of May in Europe. They're saying that while it's stagnant or even negative right now, the market will rebound for EVs in 2025 because, go figure, we have more legislation kicking in. Now, electrified vehicles, including hybrids, plug-in hybrids, accounted for about 49% of all EU passenger cars, up from 46% a year earlier. Diesel has shrunk. Petrol has shrunk, but hybrids, just like in America, hybrids have grown quite a bit. Now, this is for January through May 2024 compared to January through May 2023. So hybrids up about 4 percentage points. EVs are actually slightly negative. Plug-in hybrids are just slightly negative as well. They're pretty much stagnant. Hybrids are growing though. And Toyota sales were up 13%, which is reflected quite well with this hybrid electric intake, or uptake, I should say. And Toyota pretty much exclusively sells hybrids for most of the EU. So we're going to move on forward to BMW canceling a $2 billion battery sales contract with Northvolt. Northvolt is a Swedish company, but it seems like that company is not able to deliver the batteries on time for a long-term supply contract. But that's really the main news here, but it offers a lot of questions, right? Where is BMW going with their EV penetration in Europe, right? Because most of these would be for the European market. I wouldn't expect hardly any of these Northvolt batteries unless they were made here in North America, which I think Northvolt might be starting a plant in Canada, if I remember correctly. But it's very interesting, and I just don't think it's going to affect too much of their EV sales volume here in the United States. I'll see you guys down below. I think it's telling, right? That BMW sees a cooling in the EV market for sure. BYD profit in the EU is 10 times higher than it is in China. And even with the new 30% tariffs, BYD will still make $5,000 US per vehicle. The tariffs weren't nearly enough to temper the growth of these Chinese autos in Europe. It needed to be at least double, in my opinion. And that's why the United States has such a huge tariff, 100% tariff on EVs from China. But check this out, like BYD's is making hand over fist. And I don't know why Europeans are paying this money. To be honest, BYD is making a profit right now of over $15,000 on the Seal U in Europe compared to a profit of just $1,400 in China. This means BYD makes 14,000 US dollars more per profit. The EV import taxes from Chinese cars range from 17.4% to 38%. That is on top of the existing 10% tariffs. And duties at this level will allow BYD still to lower prices in order to gain market share in Europe. So if they're okay with having small profit margins like they are in China, they can reduce the price of this vehicle about 5,000 US dollars to bust into the market in Europe in new ways. Some are saying tariffs as high as 45 to 55% on top of the 10% should be in effect for producers like BYD. Here they compared the Seal U compared to the ID4. It's about $4,000 to $5,000 less than the Volkswagen ID4. And look how cheap they are in China. It's literally half the price. It's about half the price, the Seal U in China, compared to where it is selling in Europe. I just don't understand the European buyer being okay with just spending twice the amount of what it costs on a BYD vehicle in Europe compared to what it costs in China, even though they're made in the same places. The Atto 3 costs more than double in Europe compared to what it costs in China. Almost $40,000 in Europe compared to $18,000 in China. Just unreal. And since things are so competitive in China, Nissan is shutting down one of their auto plants, which is going to affect 130,000 units annually that they're going to not have on the market now, which is surprisingly only 8% of Nissan's total production capacity in China. That's how many units they sell over there. The Sylphy, which is the same thing as a Sentra, I believe, sells a ton of units. And I think it's the highest selling internal combustion engine non-electrified vehicle in China. This is on the backs of Honda reducing production as well as laying people off. This is on the backs of Mitsubishi pulling out entirely of China last year. This on the backs of Toyota laying off a lot of people as well. So the Chinese market is just a bloodbath, especially for automakers that are not native there. And that's why all of these tariffs on Chinese autos are because the European Union, as well as the United States government, finds that there's too much governmental intervention and unfair subsidies going on to prop up these Chinese automakers, and therefore they're getting hit with all these tariffs. But I'll see you guys down below on that. We're going to move on to automotive news. So while EV sales are actually going down in Europe, they are up in the United States. And Tesla is down 17%. And that hasn't stopped the market from actually growing here. Top 10 EV models here in the United States. Model Y is down about 5%, Model 3 down 55%. Despite that, the Model 3 is still outselling every other EV on the market besides the Model Y. And the total share of Tesla models is now below 50% for the first time ever. I would say maybe since the first time that they passed the Nissan Leaf, really, in total volume, which was eons ago, seemingly. But look at the Mustang Mach-E up 287%. The BZ4X is the fourth best-selling EV in the United States. What's going on here? Well, it's on fire sale. Toyota is putting so much money on the hood for purchasing and leasing this vehicle, as well as employees for Toyota get crazy good deals to lease it. I've heard essentially if you have a certain lease program within a Toyota as an employee, you can get the BZ4X for essentially free. So that's why, I mean, this is they're fire sailing the glut of inventory they have here. And this number will go back down, I guarantee, in the coming months quite quickly, because there's no way it should be outselling the Ioniq 5. And it shouldn't be outselling the EV6, for example, and pretty much any of these EVs, all right, due to its slow charging. But it is a good city vehicle, and if you can get a killer lease deal, It's hard to pass up, right? That's the thing. EVs are all about the lease game. It's not about purchasing. You want to lease an EV for as cheap as possible, put no money down. And Tesla Model Y, though, and Tesla Model 3, I don't believe their lease deals are as good as a lot of the competition out there. The demand for them is still high enough where Tesla doesn't have to incentivize nearly as much. Look, the BZ4X is getting nearly $11,000 of incentives per vehicle. That is not counting the EV lease credit loophole of $7,500. Total brand registrations, I mean, Toyota's not even in the top 10, or right? It looks like it because they only have one model here, where all these other manufacturers have multiple models that have higher total volume. Mustang Mach-E is getting a $9,000 incentive compared to $800 the year before. They've 10 times the amount of incentives they're putting on these EVs. Look at the Nissan Ariya. Registrations have doubled, which is still not very high, to 1,500 units, and the incentives have tripled to 16,828. Factor that in with the $7,500 lease credit, and you will be able to lease these things for dirt cheap. There's even more incentive on a Nissan Ariya than there is on a Lucid Air, which costs twice as much. And just to put this in comparison to normal cars or non-EV cars, the incentives are at $3,000. So you're seeing 5-6-fold in incentives compared to what the average industry is seeing for incentives. The only reason the EV market is doing so well seemingly right now is there's a glut of inventory. Demand is super low. And so they're incentivizing these things to the moon so you can get crazy good deals on them, specifically lease deals. They mentioned how General Motors is scaling back their EV production as well, and not just by a little bit, but by potentially 100,000 units to 200,000 versus 300,000 what they were projecting. Tesla registrations fell 17% in April, marking 3 consecutive months in the red for Tesla. And their segment ownership for EVs is now 46%. Last year's much higher at 64% of market share for EVs. And overall, EVs have risen 14% in the month of April over a lackluster first quarter, thanks to, like I said, all the incentives being put on the hoods of these EVs. So if you're in the market for an EV here in the United States anyways, it's actually a pretty good time. So much money's put on the hood of these vehicles, and you get the EV lease credit of $7,500. You can get these things for dirt cheap right now. BZ4X, I drove the Subaru Solterra recently. It's a good car. It's just not the best EV, but it's a good car. And if you're just driving around town, it's fantastic. It's quiet, it's smooth, it's fun to drive. Plenty of torque and power. It's all-wheel drive standard, that Subaru Solterra. And yeah, you can get a lease deal on it with like zero money down for like $300 a month before taxes, right? Entitling and registration, that sort of thing. But good deals are out there. And now is actually a really good time to buy an EV here in the United States as they try to sell off the glut of unwanted EVs. All right, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.